G'day guys. I saw a video recently that Jared, a dear friend from Canada, that actually produced with a young lady that basically was another victim of that big pharma company Pfizer, and that was very it made me sad for that young lady and all that. Her predicament and all that, but then I did a bit of data and analysis and all that, and realized that how horrendous those numbers are potentially on a global scale are. And I was at that point just furious, absolutely furious, spitting chips. I was so damn angry. I had to calm myself down in order to be able to do this video. So I wasn't able to respond immediately, but now that I've calmed myself down, we can go through and look at some of the details. And I think you'll be just as outraged, just as angry as I am after you've seen this video. Now, let me just share my screen, and she can tell her story, and then we'll look at some of that data.
Okay, so you said you were vaccine injured. Could you talk about that?
I took the second dose of Pfizer on September 22nd, and it attacked my nerve system. And I've been in a wheelchair since October, and now my.
So she's been in a wheelchair since October, and she took the jab at the 22nd of September last year, and it's actually caused her this problem.
My legs, it twitches whenever I walk, and I can't walk, so I'm in a wheelchair.
So she can't walk anymore. She's in a wheelchair. She gets twitches in her legs, and she's in a very bad state. These are young people. Where's the high risk? It seems that Jabba the Hutt's a bigger risk than the real McCoy, the actual virus itself. Let's take a look at some of the others. Now, the other thing that I notice is Jared's still on 644 subscribers. What the hell are you people doing? He's doing all these really good coverage of protesters that are out there, protesting for our rights against the authoritarian regime of the Trudeau family up there in Canada. I mean, please, people, you should be there supporting Jared, and he should have more subs. Get the hell on there and take his little clips, because he makes all these little short clips of people that are basically telling their stories from their heart about these things, and share them on your social media platform all over the place. Get it out there. Please, for God's sake. More victims. Michigan boy dies 3 days after. New Zealand. A woman dies after the Pfizer jab. Of a young Vietnamese student. I suspect now this is the timeline. So I was looking at the Australian timeline. This is the actual immunisation of Victoria in one of the states of Australia, for those outside the country, one of the bigger states. And they actually started administering Pfizer in February, then Astra in March, and the other ones, September, Nova, Mod, and for those who've got herpes. Anyway, so that's their schedule. But there was actually, in Norway, there was actually an earlier schedule, and I actually looked at there. So, and this is a really good report. It should have been a bit stronger worded, I would have been, but anyway, they go, why were the US media silent on Pfizer vax deaths? Yeah, we know why, because basically, the US media and the actual British media are pretty much, and Australian, pretty much misanthropic and lie to people, keep the evidence away. 23 elderly Norwegian people died after receiving Pfizer. And remember, this was actually done in January of last year. So this is about a year ago when they first were bringing these in, and the Norwegian government decided to bring these in as a priority for the elderly, to protect the elderly. They weren't concerned about so much the younger. The priority was get these early, the first one that had got approval into the system for the elderly. So they pretty much, Norway is, and this, they actually go on the report, they go, this is the information comes from the Norwegian Medicines Agency, which is like the FDA or the TGA in Australia. Norway is a small Northern European country, and only about 25,000 people have been vaxxed with Pfizer. Only that amount. That was because it was a priority for these elderly. But what happened was they had 23 deaths within that group out of 25,000. And they say, 23 deaths are a large number. They are. Statistically, they are a big number from, in terms of, that's not just a mild reaction. That's not, we're talking about death here, okay, from the vax. And then they basically go, but surprisingly, mainstream English language media, the US and British and Australian, did not report the incident immediately, obviously. Was it a cover-up? I'll let you decide on that. As if they had already reached a consensus. Obviously, it couldn't be Big Pharma. No way could it be them that are at fault here. No, it's the elderly that are at fault for dying. Yeah, a major US and UK media were obviously downplaying their deaths. Obviously, goes without saying. In contrast, those major media, exactly, will immediately hype any unfavorable information about Chinese jabs and try to amplify their impact on public psychology. Now, I'm not a fan of an authoritarian regime like China. You know that. I believe in direct democracy. I don't believe in any of these elites. About enough of them, a gutful. So, so for example, the data of China Sinovac was lower than expected in Brazil, and it was reported everywhere in the Western media, obviously, so they could actually have a go at, those are traditional vax, they're not as good, And then when there was a death of a Brazilian volunteer who participated in the trials, also became a major event in Western media. What they mean is English-speaking media, US, Canada, the Five Eyes, what I call the maritime powers that try to control the world, that group, but it was later proven that the death had nothing to do with vaccine, the vax. The Western media lost their interest, obviously, because they couldn't play that little game, the little China bashing game. Not that I'm a supporter of them. Their regime is a quite nasty regime. Let's not forget, Comrade Trudeau is a very good friend and really loves their style of actually leadership. Let's not forget. So now let's look at that data. So that's the global population, 7.9 billion currently as standing. Let's take a look at how many people actually died from the damn thing around the world, the actual illness itself. So let's get the data. And this is from, obviously, Wikipedia and other sources, which I question immediately. And I'll tell you why I question it, because basically that number is way too high that they've reported. That is a BS number. Now look at the UK number. That's how I know from the UK data. The UK data, the 20 million cases, that means, and recorded with PCR tests and all these things, and 163,000 deaths. Now we know that is BS, because I'll put the video up here that they actually did a freedom of information inquiry demanding the data in Britain, and Britain holds very good data, actually showing that the actual people that died from the actual disease in ICUs was 17,000, 431, not 163,000. This is a misrepresentation. These are all basically people that died with the actual disease, but not from the disease. Not all governments hold that information properly, and that's the problem. So I'll go on the British stuff, which is pretty much 163 divided by 17.431. We're talking about thousands here. So basically this number is inflated by more than 9-fold. So if we go on the British data on that and go 6 and divide that by that, the real numbers should be about 650,000 from, if we go on the British data. Now I'm going to basically say, well, okay, let's say the British data, because it's an older population, the average age and all that, that means it would be more realistic to say double that. So I'm going to be generous. I'm not going to go on the British data because I'll put the information there people can see from the actual illness, and I will basically inflate it not once, not double, I will 4 times. Okay, so I will go up far more, 300% than their data. Okay, so let's times it by 4. I'm going to be very generous. 2.5 million from, and that's an inflated figure that I've made up. Okay, and that's extrapolating from the UK, then saying, well, they've got a, you know, their population is much older, even though China's population is aging rapidly, and most of the other countries, it's only India that's got a younger population and all that. So even there, you'd say, you know, for half the world's population, it's aged, the other half isn't. You could still say probably about 3 times, but I'm going to be very, very generous. That's the number. Okay, so let's take a look now. If we were to do everybody on the planet of the 7 million, what would we get? What would we get? So this is 23 divided by 25,000. So 23 deaths divided by that times 7 billion people, 7.9 billion people. That's the number. That's the number. Now I'm going to say, if we include the younger people and all that, it's going to be probably half that. Divided by 2, half that. It's still more. More people are dying, could potentially die for the same proportion of people die from Pfizer compared to the actual virus. There's the difference. So where's the, you know, and we're talking about now a whole lot of people, you know, that are not even vulnerable, you know, older people, frail people. Yep. You can give them experimental stuff and take their risk because they have potentially, they could die either way in that regard. But when it comes to younger people, why would you take those risks? Why would you amplify the deaths? You know, that's very misanthropic, and that is really reckless and irresponsible of governments to be doing that sort of stuff. You know, if we were to look at the other, do it on a pure, clear slate in terms of those populations and looking at the elderly, the numbers are horrendous, you know, in that regard. If we were just focused on, you know, those sort of elderly in that regard, because if you're only looking at the sort of that elderly, you know, population, you know, the numbers would look like something like 11 times. And I'll divide that back by 4 to there, times that and then divide that by that figure. This is basically raw numbers, not taking the confounding variables and stuff like that, just raw numbers, age related and all that adjustments is 11-fold. So if you were to focus on the, you know, on an elderly population, you could get basically 11-fold difference based on the data, because most of the people on average were 80.2. 80.2. Remember, the death rate, the average age of death people in Britain was 80.2, based on official statistics from the government. So very elderly people. So if we look at the rate of deaths in elderly people in that regard, compared to the sort of Pfizer incidence, it's 11-fold difference. So more elderly also would probably be knocked off their perch based on the Norwegian, if you were to extrapolate. Obviously you can't, because that's just me making up, you know, and not because there are a lot of confounding variables. But the problem is that there could be a horrendous, you know, the numbers are definitely, either way you look at them, the most extreme to the most favorable for them, it's still worse. It's still basically 3.6 against 2.5 million. It's still 44% worse than the actual disease. Even when you're completely favorable to them, it's even worse. And if it was the same identical, why even bother? Why even bother waste so much resources if it's the same, the death rate? It's even worse, but even if it was the same, you know, why bother? And upend the whole economy, their whole lives and everything, and destroy so many people's lives. It's absurd. After seeing those statistics, you know, looking at that data and pulling that apart and actually showing the nonsense, you should be outraged, because I am. I'm really outraged, especially when they're harming so many young people needlessly, just because they are ideologically driven by their own, you know, ideologies, not really looking at serious data to basically do a sort of a cost benefit analyze, you know, how much to, you know, to treat and what are the consequences. Is anybody looking at this information, really looking carefully at this information, or just ignoring, and we're all just playing little games about whether this works or that works or whatever else, while people are dying left, right and center, you know? So I'll put the other video as well down there, which will be basically, or the other side we'll see, which will be basically the best strategies. Vitamin D, taurine, get your T lymphocytes up, those first line of defense to clear everything away. Remember, when I did this, I was in close contact. I had 0, and my brother, five negatives, even though his partner was positive, with the most contagious variant. That's what having a strong immune system does. By building up your immune system with vitamin D and taurine to build those T lymphocytes. Even that research, the BMJ research, British Medical Journal, showed that quite clear. You know, good status of vitamin D is very important, and most people are very deficient. That is why they're vulnerable to coronaviruses. And we don't need this experimental garbage endangering people's lives when there are alternatives that are much safer. And now all the data is also coming in for the Ivor, you know, mech. That one I can't even mention it, otherwise I'll get it immediately picked up by the AI. It's ridiculous that we can't bring this information to you. But anyway, please share this video, get it out there, and I hope you're as outraged as I am against these misanthropists who are basically putting so many innocent lives at risk for big pharma profits. Anyway, see you guys.